basically, we talked last time about the idea that when we're broadcasting, we rely on encryption to provide a certain level of confidentiality and privacy. We do have a bit of a headache here in that the big three options, WEP, WPA, WPA2, that are used to provide encryption require a certain amount of setup. Our reality here is that they rely on shared information to start, sometimes called a shared secret, to handle their need to have something in common that's not known by a potential listener. This is the good news and the bad news. That shared secret is pretty much this: when you check into the hotel and you look at the little pamphlet in the drawer and it tells you the hotel's wireless is available from this. That's the shared secret. That's been fed to the devices that you're talking to, and you need to feed it to your device. That creates what's actually called a handshake. So, like this. And that powers all the subsequent encryption that happens on that one shared piece of information. That's different from the SSID, which is simply the name of the network. This is sometimes called the WEP key, or the WPA key, or the encryption key, or the Wi-Fi password more generically. Might seem a little obvious, but this word password is part of our headache. The devices you're talking to don't see it as, Hilton hotels. They don't see that as the password. What they actually need is a piece of binary information, or actually what the encryption algorithm needs and then subsequently needs to be handled, is actually a piece of binary. And in practice, the more secure way to look at this is we also can view it as hex, which is a little bit more geeky friendly. So as in hexadecimal number. But if you can't get the password to work, sometimes you'll get this thing that has a lot of numbers and A through F involved. That's the hex. That's another way to represent that same piece of information. The important part to remember here is that it's still a password. No matter how we represent it, this idea of a password means somebody needs to be able to remember it or report it over a phone, which does unfortunately mean that we have the usual headaches that go with passwords. Sometimes people pick bad ones. If my key is something like the password, this is one of the well-known passwords out there, or the ever-classic password is password. This is not secure. Why is it not secure? Because everybody knows about that one. This is one of those things that's been studied pretty extensively and is actually the byproduct of a lot of hacking attacks, is this idea that, well, okay, when left to their own devices, people will pick stuff they can remember easily. Other classics, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, when doing Wi-Fi encryption. All of this becomes a pretty massive vulnerability because the password, no matter what format, and really we're talking about binary, sometimes we look at it as hex, just keep that in mind, guess what? Belongs to a bigger idea. There is what's called a key space when we're relying on this shared secret idea. A range of possible values that make up the possible number of keys. In other words, guess what? If you're really determined or you have a supercomputer handy, it's possible to break in just by doing what's called a brute force attack. This is where we start talking about encryption in the raw. A brute force attack is simply much as if I walked up to a door on campus. I'm like, well, I have a bunch of campus keys. I'm going to try every single key I have to see if it opens the door. This is the cryptographic equivalent. It's not optimal in the sense that it's sometimes very slow, but if we can use one of these well-known ones, to start with, rather than just going sequentially 00001, 00010, 00010, and so on, trying all of them in sequence, our likelihood of breaking in is pretty high. For WEP, the oldest of the standards, you could get away with, I think, as few as 6 letters pretty easily. That would generate enough data to make you a suitable password. Even with 6 letters, so that's taken from the ASCII 6 set, or at least the alphanumeric ASCII 6 set. Guess what? Turnaround time for breaking it could be as short as a few minutes. If you were choosing from one of the well-known lists, and there's a whole bunch, you'll actually get a couple of those as something to look, or a couple of chunks of those. They're actually rather long to look at. Guess what? The time drops dramatically to the point where somebody with a suitably powerful smartphone in their pocket could just possibly have at their disposal the ability to say, oh look, I found another wireless network whose password is password, just by walking around. This is kind of scary, but it's also a fact of life. Encryption is only as good as the setup we put behind it. I'm not good at this either because it's a pain, but also rotating your key is probably a good idea if there's something that you consider very sensitive, because that change forces a reset of that brute force attempt. It does mean you need to run around and change all your devices, which is kind of a pain. But, hey, this is one of those things we put up with to make sure our credit card information doesn't make it into some giant list of, like, here, I'm in a place with no extradition treaty. I have a bunch of credit card numbers. Who wants to buy them? Okay, so just very gentle slalom into the joys of encryption. We'll talk some more about this as we move on.